Very good afternoon. I would like to welcome our in-person and online participants to this policy dialogue on towards a circular and resilient economy in Europe, enabling valorization and uptake of recycled materials, organized by the European Policy Center and supported by SUEZ. My name is Stefan Šipka. I'm heading EPC Sustainable Prosperity for Europe program, and I'll be moderating this discussion, which will aim to take stock of the EU's transition towards a circular economy with a focus on recycling and the uptake of secondary materials, given that there is still work to be done to complete the single market for waste, including also the role for EU policies to advance this transition, which bears significant importance for EU sustainability, competitiveness, and resilience. It is my pleasure to welcome Jessika Roswall, European Commissioner for Environment, Water Resilience, and a Competitive Circular Economy. Thank you very much for joining us. We will hear Commissioner's keynote address, followed by a brief Q&A with the participants. So think about your questions already now, and then we will come back and invite also our panelists to join us. So without further ado, Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. Moving from a linear, wasteful economy to a circular, sustainable one is a political priority for the EU and also personally for me. The circular economy used to be a conversation based on environmental and climate considerations. The dimension is obviously very important, but when speaking about circularity today, we also need to place the conversation in a much wider context of our security, our resilience, and our competitiveness in this geopolitical context. Getting to circularity is a change of mindset. We need to rethink how we live, how we do businesses, and how we interact with the world around us. This is a whole of society approach, and it needs a whole of society transition. Sorry. I've been talking too much today. I need a water. So the whole of society transition. So that is why I'm so very happy to be here today. For almost 30 years, the European Policy Center, EPC, has been providing a platform to engage stakeholders and citizens in EU policy making. So this is the ideal place to discuss the circular economy and to map out our path to a resilient and a sustainable future. Today we extract, we make, we use, we dump our products. Then we start from the beginning to do it all over again. It is bad for the planet, bad for our economies, and bad for our businesses. In the last 50 years, global extraction of resources has more than tripled. We are using natural resources nearly twice as fast as the ecosystem can regenerate them. It is not sustainable, it is not smart, and it's not strategic. The Circular Economy Act aims to break this destructive spiral before it's too late. The Act will build on several decades of waste legislation and on progress made under the European Green Deal. In parallel, we are working hard to make sure that the products on our markets are durable, repairable, and recyclable. But we are still almost 90% linear, and we are not moving far enough, neither fast enough, towards circularity. Some of this can be explained by the fact that much of the recent legislation promoting circularity has not entered into application yet. But as Enrico Letta and Mario Draghi highlighted, we need to get the economics right and create a single market for secondary raw materials. And this is exactly what the Circular Economy Act is going to do. It aims to identify market bottlenecks and to improve the economics of circular solutions. The potential is clear. If we can make more with the same amount of natural resources, we can improve our economic security and our resilience. We can increase our competitiveness, and we can reduce environmental impacts. We can reduce waste, create more value, and cut greenhouse gas emissions. Circularity alone measures, if we circular measures alone can deliver a decrease with 20 to 25% of the greenhouse gas emission that we have, and that we need, as you know, to reach our goals by 2050. Quite often, the bottlenecks can be very specific. Take plastic, for example. Plastic is a great invention, but plastic consumption has grown rapidly over the recent decades, and with that, of course, plastic waste. Yet recycling rates are not just good enough. According to Plastic Europe, only 13% of plastic production in 2023 was based on recycled plastics. Why? Yeah, because primary plastics are simply cheaper than secondary ones. Of course, this ignores the massive environmental, economic, security and social costs. We have done and we are doing a lot to tackle this, including legislation to support plastic waste prevention and recycling, trade measures to ensure a level playing field, and extended producer responsibility fees to help finance collection and recycling. But still, there isn't enough confidence in future demand, and this is the killer bottleneck. Investors won't build new recycling capacities unless they are confident that they will be able to sell the recycled materials. And we need to be very mindful of the level playing field. Our recyclers are not only up against EU competition, our EU markets are flooded with plastic from overseas. I'm sorry to say, but I don't have the silver bullet to fix it. But I am determined that we can find solutions. So let me also start with saying a few thoughts on the design of the Act. First, we need to be targeted. This is not one-size-fits-all solution. The bottlenecks for plastic, which I talked about just now, is different from textiles, different from steel, different from aluminium or cement. And this means that the solutions will also be different. Second, our legislative processes need to consider and balance the needs of various economic operators, the recyclers, the producers, the traders, the consumers, and others. We are here walking a very fine line between having too much detail and complexity on the one hand, and establishing rules that are too general and lack nuance on the other. We have to get it right, and that takes time. We need to understand that markets, the bottlenecks, and the interests are involved. We have launched a call for evidence and public consultation to help answer these questions. It is open until the 6th of November. And your views and expertise are vital, so I really urge you to contribute. We will also undertake serious impact assessment. However, the challenges that we face are immediate. And this is my third point. Europe cannot wait. Europe is the #1 global export of services and #2 of exporter of goods. But EU industries is exposed to high energy costs, strategic dependencies, and the risk of the impact of overcapacities in other global regions. So we need to speed up the transition to circularity. Before the end of this year, we will adopt a series of short-term initiatives designed to boost investments, to apply trade measures where justified, and to simplify. Together with the other elements of the Clean Industrial Deal, these measures will help to make our vision for economic security, competitiveness, and decarbonization a reality. Fourth, and finally, it's said that laws are like sausages. And we don't want to know really how they are being made. I'm a lawyer by training and a lawmaker by trade, and I can confirm that creating laws is a quite messy business. It requires negotiations, collaboration, and compromises. But that doesn't mean that we should accept some of the unnecessary complexities that our systems throw up in the legislation. And that is exactly what we are trying to do now in this simplification omnibus. Our goal is to make it easier for businesses to do business while continuing to uphold our high environmental standards. Ladies and gentlemen, I began today on the importance of collaboration and with a nod towards circularity, and I will finish here too. This cannot succeed without the input, the insight, and the experience of industry, civil society, academia, policy makers, and citizens, and businesses, big and small. So again, I urge you to engage and to commit, to help us, help me to close the loop, to drive the transition to a competitive, resilient, and circular economy. One circular economy that is good for businesses, good for citizens, good for the environment, and good for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for also for your reflections also on the importance of why circular economy matters for sustainability, for businesses, and also how we need to stay true to our ambitions while navigating across different potential complexities that surround this transition. I just wanted to follow up with one question, in a way building on also what you referenced already in your speech. I would add a bit of a geopolitical spice to the discussion around circular economy and recycling. I think initially we were discussing about circular economy when it was introduced as a sustainability and business case for Europe, but now we have security, we have resilience, we have defense, we have a number of other agendas that are becoming more and more prominent and recognized as part of the new cycle, rightfully so, of course, given different geopolitical tensions, of course, conflicts, including one in Europe with Russia's invasion. So I'm just wondering how to go about this. How do we think about circular economy? How do we think about recycling, also in terms of it affects trade, it affects our exports, the new thinking behind geopolitics, and how does this concept, how does this agenda shape the Commission's thinking around the circular economy agenda?
Thank you very much. Both, I would say, the easy answer is that it fits very well in that new political agenda. But we maybe start with something that I say and I reflect a lot about myself, is that sometimes I think, and this is criticism against politicians like me, is that we sometimes only focus on one subject at the time, and the world doesn't look like that. We need to have like different thoughts in the head at the same time. The good thing with circularity is it fits in all the things that we are working on at the moment. Yes, so security is the main priority for Europe now, of obvious reasons. Competitiveness is also main priority, because we need to be more competitive I mean, I'm not an economic, I said I was a lawyer, but so I cannot count, but of course I understand that we need to have competitive and prosperous businesses to do whatever, all the other things that we need to do and want to do. And circular economy is also tackling all these challenges that we have with climate change, as I said, but also on the environmental degradation and how we use. So I would say this is why I am in a hurry, my president is in a hurry. All the industries I meet, whether it's automotive industries, metal or steel industries, chemical industry, the bioeconomy, which I'm working with also, they also ask, we need to be more circular. So for me, it's like when we talk about security, by using the resources much more sustainable, it's circularity. When we're talking about decarbonization, circularity can happen, as I say, 20 to 25%. When it comes to competitiveness, I'm certain that we can be more competitive if we are more circular. We see a lot of challenges, so you probably will ask me about those, because today virgin materials are cheaper. But we know for the fact, going back to the Letter report, for example, he pointed out how much money is to save or gain to if we just look at the critical raw materials, which just is one stream, but a very important one, of course, for our economy. If we can use and recycle more in that, when it comes to critical raw materials, we are only recycling 1%. 1%. Well, really, it's so. So, I mean, according to me, it is perfectly in this geopolitical times that we are in. And maybe I should add also, because I have a lot of frustration. Some of you have met me earlier on that when I talk about circularity, that we are still not circular, and we are, as I said, 90% linear. and we have talked about it for a long time. Everybody I meet is in favor, nobody's against, but still we don't do it. I think that the security angle, the momentum is here, that we really need to act, and that is something that hopefully will help also me in the coming years.
Thank you very much indeed. But also the question around the prices and the competitiveness, so secondary materials versus primary materials is an important one, and something that my understanding is, in a way, is to be addressed with the upcoming Circular Economy Act to an extent to make this, to complete the single market for waste and to make recycled materials more competitive and facilitate their uptake. But yeah, I would be happy to follow up with some questions as well, but I also would like to give the chance to our participants for any comments or any questions in this regard. We have a question from gentleman.
Patrick van den Bosche from Agoria. I want to a Belgian Trade Federation, amongst others, in recycling of critical raw materials. I want to ask a question and a suggestion, because you focus quite a lot on circular economy, the link to resilience, the link to climate. But I take one very practical example. 8th of October, China steps up the export restrictions on rare earths. It's quite recently. A lot of turmoil. It's really geopolitical, trade war. And yes, we have some recycling activities in Europe. But if I would be a company recycling rare earths, how could I scale up? Because if I want to scale up, I need to wait for my permit around 2-3 years. So scaling up is possible, and I do see some problems in that point, even in the Critical Raw Materials Act. You have the speeding up of the permitting, but in reality, you still need your environmental assessment, you still need to make the analysis, and it takes time. So I'm a little bit looking for the solution of being agile in this time of trade war, of political. Do you have any view on that, or any ideas how we could speed up? Because in critical raw materials, we need to speed up. Otherwise, we are behind.
Thank you very much. I would take one or two more questions in this row. I believe the gentleman in the third row, on my left.
Thank you. My name is Daniel from the capital region of Denmark. Thanks to EPC and Jessika for this. I have a general question regarding circular construction, which is an issue in the capital region because we have a scarcity of primary raw materials. And my question to the Commissioner is, which measures do you think are needed to create a functioning market for secondary raw materials within circular construction, such as EPR or harmonized end-of-waste criteria?
Thank you. And perhaps one more question just to your left.
Thank you so much. Dear Commissioner, Andrea Chionero from the European Branded Clothing Association, Textile Retail. I have just a question. You mentioned in your speech about also the simplification, and I think you were referring to the environmental omnibus initiative that you're launching currently. A couple of questions concerning this timing of the proposal, first, and secondly, in relation with Circular Economy Act. How complementary are these two initiatives? Which are the overlaps and the main, differences that we're gonna see it, apart from, of course, the Circular Economy Act will be creating, synergies, and the other one is more about simplification. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So we'll have a brief stop here. So back to you, Commissioner. So the questions, a bit more specific questions to the extent that you can address them on rare earths, on construction, and on the omnibus when it comes to circular economy.
Thank you very much. No, I agree with you. And of course, I see the challenges and also with China's act at the moment, and that is of course why one of the reasons that me and some of my colleagues also went to Beijing, and we have a close cooperation because we are in this dependency, whether we like it or not. But that means we also need to speed up what we are doing, and I think both I'm focusing on the recycling part, but of course there are also other parts of this solution with, of course, mainly some of my other colleagues working with, but it's linked. Because what I hear from businesses around Europe is that they're saying there is techniques, sometimes lack of infrastructure, sometimes lack of coherence between different member states, and of course the scale up is, as you say, a big issue, not only to this but also to a lot of other things that we are talking about. Permitting is one thing that is coming up over and over in my discussions, not only from this perspective but from other perspectives also. It can be energy grids, or it could be whatever. So I think this is something, and I will agree that it takes too long, not only permitting to build a plant but also to get your product onto the market. So there's a lot of things here to speed up. One thing that I think is important for me to mention on this, and I say this to member states also, it's not only EU regulation that is hindering that the permitting process is too slow. It's a lot of national implementation, sometimes lack of capacity on a regional or member states level. So I think that we need to work together on this. But that said, I think that the European legislation on permitting, we can agree that it's very fragmentized also. We have for net zero, we have for defense and so forth. So this is something I can say has been raised in the to me many times, and also in the call for evidence in the simplification. Maybe I should go take this last question before I go to construction, because that is linked a little bit. I mean, I cannot say exactly on timing, because if I say that, then I will be criticized because I didn't follow it up. I've learned the hard way, to be honest. But of course, we have said the omnibus on the environment we are pushing before this in this year. So exactly when? So as soon as possible. I also would like to say and take this opportunity that we are working since the day one I started also on implementing act on prioritizing these who are for simplification, looking for overlaps. Guidance, I think, get back to permitting, guidance will also speed up and help member states. So I think we are doing a lot of things at the same time. On the overlaps to Circular Economy Act and other, I mean, as I a little bit said in the speech, we are trying to put forward also things that can help to boost the circularity already this year. And yes, I don't think it will be overlaps. I think that we are looking for things that is necessary now. Plastic, as I mentioned several times, the plastic recycling is in a difficult situation. We need to see if we can have measures to help that industry, because it is important for Europe's resilience, also for our competitiveness, and it linked to a lot of other legislations that we do, and we demand recycled materials. So it's in our own interest. So it will come. I would say it will follow me hopefully all these 5 years, because I don't think that we will ever stop. And bioeconomy, I have to say also in this moment, because bioeconomy is also by nature circular. And that strategy will come also before, by the beginning of November, actually. Construction. Yes, I know that construction sector have great potential. It's a lot of challenges, both when it comes to decarbonization, but also recycling. Here I would say that you lift one of the components that is important for getting the circularity really circular competitive is looking at the end of waste criteria. That we have legislation for, what we looking to, we have prioritized some sectors, some materials, which is important. I would like to raise also when we talk about end of waste, because you said we need to complete the single market for waste. I agree, but we are far from it. It's not only 27 member states, it's also regions and other things. Sorry to jump. But we also, when we talk about the end of waste, we also need to start on the design of the product. So it is possible when we design, not me, but when the products are designed, that there are they are easy to collect, they are easy to separate, maybe reuse before they are separated. So I think I'm trying to always talk not only about the waste part, but also trying to we should talk less about, well, sometimes I say we should talk more about waste, and saying that waste is a resource. You know, I use this trash to cash, and I have a lot of nice saying on this, because this is a resource, but that's why I really don't want to call it waste. We should use it as a resource. So we're looking for both the design, the important collection phase of a material, but also the reuse, and then also recycling. So we are trying to look at this. But end of waste is, of course, very critical to make this single market for waste reality.
Thank you so much for your also responsible, but also adding on top the importance of bioeconomy, and that is also inextricably interlinked with circular economy, and coming back to the importance of working together with the member states, with the regions, and in order to achieve this transition. And indeed, there is still a road ahead to complete the single market for waste, notwithstanding other aspects of circular economy on the product side, so forth. But thank you for that. I think we have time for, let's say, 2 more questions. If we keep it super brief and really up to the point. Yes, starting with yes.
So, I'm Melinda from the detergent sector, actually, representing the association here in Brussels, AISE, and I would like actually to raise a question also regarding the recyclability content in the packaging and packaging waste regulation. As a sector, we have been waiting for quite some time to have some indications with regards to the recycled content methodology that will be issued through the delegated acts and implemented acts next year. However, at the moment, it's quite unclear what to expect. So I would like to hear from your side whether some of these aspects are being considered under the omnibus simplification package, and if not, how is the Commission intending to support the recyclability in general through other legislations beyond the Circular Economy Act? Thank you.
Thank you, and the gentleman in the third row.
Hi, Rouve from Morgane from the city of Stockholm. So maybe, maybe presenting a different perspective here. But first of all, we really welcome this initiative. We feel that it's a step in the right direction, and we're really happy that we see this initiative coming up from the Commission, especially since we have very strict set goals on, for example, decreasing scope 3 emissions and that sort of thing within our city. But I'm also glad that you mentioned here in your speech the extended producer responsibility. And for a municipal actor, I think this is a very key factor when it comes to sort of alleviating the pressure from municipal actors when it comes to handling the increased costs that this regulation would mean for a local legislative level. So I would really like to hear if you have anything additional to say on that matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And over to you, Commissioner.
Thank you. No, but thank you for the questions. And I met you and your organization mostly when I discuss chemicals, actually, because that's also part. I have the best portfolio of everyone. The others don't agree, of course, but I would say most fun anyway. And yes, the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive has, of course, one directive that is I get a lot of questions about. I've been very clear that we are very much working on the different implementing acts as fast as possible. I do know the challenges that the industry is facing because they are short of time. Also guidance. I cannot today say whatever would be in the omnibus because that is, of course, as you can imagine, under discussions. Also evaluation from my part because we have just concluded the call of evidence. As you know, we got 200,000 inputs. Very good. And also 1,200 from businesses, NGOs, academia and organizations. So, I mean, really good. So, but I'm fully aware of some of the challenges in that legislation. Let's put it like that. Will the Commission support recyclability? I think I answered that a little bit earlier. I'm sorry, I've been talking too much. It's fun to talk. I mean, yes, of course, because I think that is key to get circularity. But I like to talk about it in the whole chain, so to say, from extraction even, and also on how to design and all this. But it's the more I learn, of course, and you are expert in your different sectors on products. It is not one answer. Unfortunately, it's so many different answers to this, but of course we are thinking about, as I said, I urge you to engage in this discussion on how can we help to boost the industry. Of course, scaling up, we discussed it a bit earlier, but also public procurement is one thing that is raised very often. So at the moment everything is on the table. Let us discuss what can the Commission do, what can member states do. I think that is it's everything is up at the moment, so I'm open for inputs. Stockholm. Yes, I understand. It's good that you mentioned that also, because municipalities sometimes we tend to discuss the businesses and people, but also who is paying the cost at the end, if it's the taxpayers or someone else. So it's good. So I would say that circularity is something that talk very much with regions on, because when it comes to waste management, it's not only, of course member states legislation, EU legislation, but it's you that is implementing. So that's important input for me. The EPR and the extended producer responsibility, we have a lot of different products. And I think it's a very good model on how we can increase sustainability, if you may use that word in our economy. Different models on how to use that. That is something that's it's criticized sometimes because we don't get the single market for waste if we do too much differently when it comes to this. Businesses like, sorry to take another Swedish example, but IKEA is of course in all member states and all around the world, and they of course and other big companies here I see also ask for some more harmonization that will also help to use this fantastic 450 million single market. So that I'm thinking, I think that we need to talk more about harmonization on the EPR schemes. But we are, as you know, from next year, we have agreed. That was, I don't know, my first legislation was deforestation, that I know very well. But then I went on the second, I think, was on textile waste and food waste. That is new legislation that is now coming into force. I think that is important for your businesses, but also for the textile industry as such. But as I said it earlier, it's also a lot of other challenges when it comes to textile, for example, because of the influx of materials and textiles that is not maybe necessarily following the hard rules that we have in Europe, which is not easy to solve, but I think that we need to solve it. So we are working on different streams, and also the modeling, the eco-modeling of the EPR schemes are also something that is we are discussing at the moment. I would also say, for me, it's really important to have this opportunity to discuss with you, and also with stakeholders, because I don't like when politicians like pushing things on industries or municipalities, regions, because that is not how we solve things. We need to do it in tandem together. So that's why we discussed earlier on the end of waste criteria. We have platforms for that. We have platform for the eco design. So I think this is the way forward, but we need the speed.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And I would be delighted to continue the discussion, and I hope there will be an opportunity for that in the future. But looking at the time, I think we can slowly wrap up this session, and I would just like to really thank you for joining us for today and for sharing these very valuable reflections with us. So, an applause for the Commissioner. Yeah. I would now like to kindly invite our panelists to join me here at the podium. time to resume. And yeah, I think it was really great to hear from Commissioner Roswall. I think she added, provided a very, very good overview where we stand now with the circular economy, also recycling in particular, what EU initiatives to expect, also looking into some particular questions, areas and sectors that we should be mindful of. And yeah, great that we can now expand on that and add additional reflections on top of that together with the panelists that are really delighted to have joining me today. We will hear some introductory remarks from our panelists, followed then by quick reactions from our respondents, and then back to the Q&A with the participants. And I invite you again to think about your questions already now and to pose them as soon as you can, so we can address as many questions as possible by the end of this session. So now I would like to turn to our online speaker for today, Emmanuel Chaponniere, Head of Division Circular Economy and Sustainable Development from the European Investment Bank. Emmanuel, thanks for joining us for this event. I hope you can hear us and see us well. And again, building on what the Commissioner said, I would be happy also to hear from you on when it comes to the investment side of the whole transition to greater circularity. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I assume that you hear me well.
We do.
Perfect. So first of all, apologies for not being in presence. It's not that Luxembourg is that far away from Brussels, but okay, given the transport circumstances, I rather stay in Luxembourg to avoid the strike. And it's very good that you could also organize this hybrid session so that I could still participate. So thank you again, and thank you for the invitation to participate to this panel. Well, I mean, I'm not going to repeat or explain again why recycling matters. We've gone through the strategic autonomy, the carbon emission reduction, and the environmental impact. But just wanted to stress out that as a circular economy advocate, recycling is the end of the pipe solution, and we should not forget also the upstream action, which are also the rethinking, the reuse, the design. And because they have the same objective, and they are not contradictory objectives, they are all complementary, because as Commissioner Roswall said, I mean, we're 12% linear circular, trying to go to 24%. So, I mean, we still have room to go, and there is already a lot of material which is already stored into the economy. So we will still need, a fair amount of recycling to put back most of this material back into the economy. So how do we enable investment in the recycling space? Well, I mean, there's no miracle, and it's the usual, pull the demand, support the offer by facilitating project development and de-risking financing. And as well as Commissioner Roswall alluded to initially, when we speak about recycling, I think there is different material streams that have very different characteristics, and we need to be mindful as well that, I mean, it's not one solution fits all. Metal, and even in metal, steel, aluminum, copper, if we want to take only three of them, have very different dynamic. I mean, steel, the price is going down because China construction sector is also going lower, so prices are going down. Copper is still high, so you see also some dynamic around here, but we can see that on metal with 80% recycling rate for, I think, steel and 70% for aluminum, there is a market which is working, and there is different adjustment. Totally the opposite for textile and plastic, which have very different market situation, with plastic very dependent on the oil, textile with almost no recycling. Critical raw material, another total different situation for a very big demand with very limited recycling, but also some ambitious objective in the Critical Raw Material Act, and same for packaging. So just briefly, how can we, pool the demand? Because, that's the first thing. When we speak about investment, it's not just about, if we want to invest into an operation, into a business, into a company, this company needs to be sound. The business plan, the business case needs to be sound, and if the market's not there, we cannot do it. So first, we need to pull the demand, and I guess this is about regulation, and this is about setting up the right market correction. I'm not going to, go deep into this because I guess probably William Neale, from the Commission, should be touching upon this. And the Commissioner has already mentioned many regulations, the ESPR, the packaging waste. Public procurement is also a very big lever on the demand side. So we need to boost the demand. From our side, this is not an investment situation. It's more about also, what we can contribute to here is through our advisory branch. We were mentioning the municipalities, and the cities. We have the C3, which is the Circular City Center, which is free resources for municipalities to set up circular action plan, circular strategy, and then support them in implementing it. And this will also contribute to increasing the demand towards secondary raw material towards circular product. So this is one, pulling the demand. Now, how can we support the offer? Again, there's a bit of regulation because in some waste stream, and you take, for example, the waste for electric and electronic, if you start to set up a recycling center, I guess you need a minimum critical size to reach economy of scale. And here, if your waste cannot move around different countries, then you're stuck. So we need to have this single market for waste so that some waste stream can be moved around. We need to have this end of waste criteria, which is also harmonized so that we produce, or we favor a positive environment onto this kind of investment. Then about infrastructure. When we speak about recycling, first we need to collect and sort the waste and the different products that need to go into the recycling center. And in some countries, we have a fair, good coverage of collection and sorting, but in some other geographies in Europe, this is still lacking. So there's also quite a fair amount of investment that needs to be done. And on this side, this investment is about either public, corporate, project finance, which are, let's say, risk-limited investment. It's more about regulated business for some of them in some geographies. But this is the kind of financing tool that we can provide on public loans, corporate loan, project finance approach. For small municipalities, we can also bundle different municipalities through framework loan, through intermediated financing to reach out to a smaller client. Then we get also on the innovation, because recycling on different new products, you need, you take plastic, you take copper. We need to have, we need innovation. We need to have a new business stream. And here we need to de-risk these businesses so that they can access to financing. And this is done through blending with the Commission, using guarantees from the Commission, using our venture debt tool or equity tool through the investment, the European Investment Fund, so where we can have equity tool as well. So I think on this, we also have the financing palette to provide a solution. And I really think that we need to have the market up and running, and then this money can be injected. And we see, we've done it, for example, recently in Spain on plastic recycling, end of waste, so meaning, refusable waste, so plastic that cannot be mechanically recycled. So we need to go through another type of recycling, like chemical recycling. There was a large investment in Spain, but which still is risky. So it was supported by InvestEU because of the market dynamic around plastic. And for copper, we have also two recent examples where in Germany, Bulgaria, France, Belgium, Sweden, we also finance some operation on copper recycling. So I think we are present. So far, from 2020 up to now, I mean, end of 24, we don't have the full statistic now. We have been financing or injecting 5.1 billion euro in circular economy operation. It's not a lot. I mean, when we look at the investment gap, there is a lot that can be we can do much more. And I think to go much more, we need to also, and this is some ongoing discussion, to look into scaling up or increasing the volume or the guarantees on the InvestEU or the competitiveness fund in the future that will be replacing InvestEU to target some specific circular economy sector. And I think this will be a way of really injecting money into some subsector. On innovation as well, I mean, we have the Innovation Fund, which is also targeting more low carbon technology. Recycling is also on low carbon. And for the time being, the Innovation Fund was focusing on different type of business. I mean, just an idea, I think this is also some tools or similar tool that could be used to also support and boost innovation in this space. So for us, I mean, just to conclude, recycling is an interesting part of EU strategy in the circular economy. It contributes to the overall competitiveness strategy. So we're fully on board with it. I mean, it fills all our 8 strategic priorities, and we really stand ready through our lending arm or through advisory branch to support all the potential clients in the economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, for your overview also on how the EIB can also support this transition with financing or supporting or enabling investments into recycling, and also the importance of the right interplay between financial and regulatory instruments on this. Happy to come back to some of these, of course. But now I would be happy to hear also from, let's say, from the industry perspective, how does this transition look like? We have with us Lyonel Rouve, CEO for Recycling Specialized Flows from SUEZ. So any thoughts from your side on the implementation and scaling up of effective recycling practices or any additional reflections would be highly welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thanks a lot for organizing this event. Thanks a lot also to the EU Commissioner, Ms. Roswall, for her attendance today. Actually, SUEZ has been working in the circular economy for more than 160 years. And based on this experience, I can tell you, we can testify that we are facing one of the most challenging time ever. So it's good to have this discussion. Thanks a lot again. When it comes to circular economy, first, what we'd like to witness is that a lot has been done at the EU level, a lot. We could mention PPWR, Circular Economy Act, I mean, waste shipment regulation, and so on. I mean, not to mention everything, the last one being a battery booster, for instance. And yet, we're facing a lot of difficulties, So I come back on that with first sharing my experience as an industrial player, and then making some proposal about what could be done to go beyond what is today on the table. Let me briefly introduce you SUEZ. Who is SUEZ? SUEZ, with 40 employees in 40 countries, the group is providing the customers with innovative and resilient solutions for both water and waste services. In 2024, SUEZ delivers solutions enabling to avoid 6 million tons of CO2 on behalf of its clients. 1/3 of it comes from recycling business. This is our purpose. Our purpose is to provide our industrial customers with secondary raw materials. This is not only about waste, this is about the sourcing of our industry. Last point about SUEZ, we strongly believe in partnership. We strongly believe in ecosystems. I come back on that, but competitiveness is key. And our experience is that one of the necessary or best way to remain competitive as a European player against Asia or against North American players is to share value instead of adding up the margin between different players. So in SUEZ, we got a strong DNA in terms of partnerships. We got some good partnership with OEM manufacturer, Renault, Airbus, Safran, Nexans, not to mention a few ones. But we believe that when it comes to competitiveness, it's really key. So let me share our experience today as a recycling industry. First message, competitiveness is a must. There will not be any competitive industry without any competitive recycling industry. This is absolutely key. Nobody will pay for higher price just because it's green. So we have to keep that in mind. And what we need to focus our efforts on is not about just providing subsidies to everybody for a long period of time, but we have to make sure that the whole ecosystem from recycling up to manufacturing remains competitive. The issue is what? The issue is that all the players are not playing the same rules. We open the papers. The US are closing the market very strongly. Chinese players and even Asian players as a whole, they do have overcapacity. And what they should do is to reduce their overcapacity, but that's not what they are not doing. What they are doing is they are selling their excess of production into other markets. US is not possible anymore, so they do that in Europe. So we are really struggled between the US closing the markets and the Chinese. Even worse, the Chinese players, we may spend some time on that, but the Chinese players, they are playing with our loopholes in Europe. For instance, we don't have any differentiated custom codes between virgin and recycled plastics, so that today in Europe, when it comes to packaging, industrial players are meeting the European targets in terms of recycled content thanks to virgin plastics coming from Asia. So we must stop that. It's all about playing the same rules. That's the first message. The second one, I'd like to share with you our sense of emergency. The EU Commissioner mentioned that we're running out of time, speed is key, but just plastic recycling industry is just dying. We have seen 15 plants being closed in 2025, whilst the volumes of PET imported over the last 4 years or 5 years has increased by 50%. So clearly, we got no time, and this picture is going to get worse over the next few months. There will be more closure and more projects that will be suspended or even stopped. Third message. The issue of the EU industry, which is facing a very difficult time because they are not competitive and because the market is really sluggish. The issue is not the recycling part. This is not about sourcing. The recycling is part of the solution. It's not part of the issue. I mentioned that why? Because currently there is a debate regarding should we tax the export of scrap metals towards other countries out of Europe. That would be highly counterproductive. The EU steel industry is actually not competitive because of the energy cost, because they didn't do the shift from burning furnace up to EAF, for many reasons, and it's not because of the sourcing. So tackling or trying to impose restrictions on the export of scrap metals will just weaken the recycling industry whilst not solving the steel industry issues. Just to give you a few figures, that's very simple. Over the last 10 years, the demand for scrap steel has been decreasing by 12% in Europe, whilst the level of scrap collected decreased by 3%, leading to a surplus of scrap metals of 10 to 12 million tons. This is more or less 10 to 15 to 20%. So what do we do this? We need to export it. So please do not oppose the sourcing, the recycling, the rest of the industry. We are all in the same team, and we all need to be competitive. So what should we do? This is the situation, and the situation is not so easy, as you already mentioned. First of all, a lot has been launched, a lot of initiatives on the table, so the very first step is to make sure they are clearly implemented. It has already been mentioned by EU Commissioner. The PPWR has to be put in place. We need I come back on that. It's quite important for the plastic industry. We need to have differentiated codes between custom codes between virgin and recycled plastics. Mirror clause will have to be implemented as soon as possible. I mean, everything that we are discussing has to be put in place, including penalties for the players who do not meet the targets. But can we go beyond that? And the reply is clearly yes. And we may have a few proposals. I would even say that yes, we have to, because I'm coming back to my message, which is the sense of emergency. First, it's all about securing access to critical materials. And we'll take the example of the EV batteries today. EV batteries, recycling of EV batteries, it's not a question about recycling business. It's a question about the European automotive industry. Today, there is no closed loop in Europe, meaning that the black mass in which we find lithium, nickel, cobalt, and manganese, all these critical metals that are needed to produce new batteries and that need to be reintegrated in the future, all those materials, all black mass is exported to Asia. OECD countries, thanks to the status of hazardous waste, which has to be clearly defined. This is very important. But it means what? It means that in long-term run, if we don't set up a closed loop in Europe, and it's all about partnership, coming back to my initial point, but it's shredding, it is hydrometallurgy, PCAM, we need to find partnership amongst players. If we don't do that, all our OEM industry will be dependent on Asia. Needless to say that the day China decides to increase the prices, you can put whatever custom taxes on the import or automotive, it will be useless. On that point, we do believe that when it comes to regulation, the battery booster, which has been recently announced, is a very good point, very positive. But the next step is to make sure that it does include the recycling part of the batteries. Second point, minimum recycled content. This is something which is already taken into account in the regulation. It is very powerful, clearly. It's necessary, very powerful. But we have to strengthen it. We have to strengthen it by, I would say, reinforcing the definition. It has to be not a minimum recycled content, but EU minimum recycled content. Why? Because today, it's true for the plastics, as I mentioned. It's going to be true for the cobalt, lithium in EV batteries. The oil industry, if we keep on with the same definition, the oil industry will keep on purchasing the secondary raw materials to Asia and tomorrow to the US. So at the end, we will not change the game. So we need to make sure that the minimum recycled content are calculated, take into account EU produced recycled content. First proposal. Second proposal is also to extend the minimum recycled content to other applications of the plastics. We talk about PPDOR, which is very positive, but it's only regarding packaging. There are a lot of applications. Just to mention, PVC in the construction sector today is in big crisis, so that's something we should consider also. And last point, then we can go through the Q&A and other presentations, but last point is that we do believe, and I'm focusing on the plastics today, we're on deep crisis, but we do believe that we should expand the recent announcement of the EU Commission regarding taxes on the volumes above a certain quota of scrap being imported from countries out of Europe to be expanded to other materials. We need to protect our market, clearly. Big competitors, global competitors, especially Asian ones, that are just having overcapacity, playing with the rules, fully subsidized, the products subsidized. So we need to protect our market, and we propose to have an extension of this announcement to the plastics, whether they are virgin or recycled. And by the way, this is just what the US announced in September this year by imposing taxes on the importation of recycled PET in their market. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lyonel, for these reflections. And I would say also I think it was interesting how you discussed the way you clarify in a way how does the new geo-economic context we find ourselves in, how does it translate into concrete concerns when it comes to European businesses, the recycling, but also beyond, and how we need to also connect these different value chains so that we actually create a competitive case for recycled materials. Of course, not to speak about implementation. Of course, we need to double down on that effort, and also for some ideas for the way forward. Now, back to the Commission. We have with us today William Neale, Advisor for Circular Economy from DG Environment. William, we heard from the Commission, and also we heard from EIB, from SUEZ. Any additional thoughts about the EU policies on circular economy and recycling, building on this?
Well, thank you, Stefan. Hello, everybody. And happy International E-Waste Day, in case you didn't know. It wasn't designated that, but apparently it's International E-Waste Day, but we can talk about other things. So, yeah, just a few points to make, reacting a little bit to what's already been said, but also a few more general points to put out there from the Commission perspective. It's always a tall order to speak after the Commissioner herself. So I think first thing is why we're doing this. I mean, circular economy isn't in it. It's not an end in itself. It's a means to many ends. And Emmanuel was saying, it fits in with the 8 objectives. It also fits in very well with the 3 objectives or 3 visions, if you like, of the competitiveness compass. And it fits in very well with the overall approach of the clean industrial deal, because it's about improving competitiveness for reasons that we've already talked about. I mean, materials are such a big input cost for EU manufacturing, more than twice as much as labour and energy combined. It's important for climate. We heard the 20 to 25% figure that the Commission mentioned, which is a very conservative estimate of the ability of circularity to deliver on climate. Also, in terms of our strategic autonomy, resilience, in terms of jobs, in terms of innovation and so on. I mean, circularity is by definition innovative because we're tackling a predominantly linear system. So it fits in very well with that whole approach of the clean industrial deal. It is kind of one pillar of that deal. There are 6 pillars. There's a circularity and access to materials pillar, but as I say, it does help deliver on many of the other elements of the clean industrial deal. Why Europe? I mean, I think we like to say that we are already leading in terms of circularity in Europe, but as we've also heard, that doesn't really mean a lot when we're, 12% circular. What does 100% circular mean? I mean, it's impossible. If you're talking about that circular material use rate, the amount of materials being pumped back into the economy, you can probably get to 30% or so. That's been proven by the Netherlands. It's already pretty much at that rate. But we have also, I mean, if you look at the periodic table, you look at the recycling rates of the different elements, I think there are only 2 of them that are over 50%. I don't know if anybody here can guess what they are. So it's lead and silver, apparently. I could be corrected, but and as the Commissioner said, less than 1% recycling of critical raw materials within Europe. So we've got a lot still to do in many of those areas. And we heard what we should do from, as we've already heard, Mario Draghi, Enrico Letta on the single market. We heard from business and the Antwerp Declaration, more than 1,000 businesses signing up to that, particularly focusing on the circularity of critical raw materials again, and from member states in the European Council in November last year in the Budapest Declaration, saying that circularity is key to the competitiveness of Europe. So I guess we're kind of looking, as we move forward, looking towards the Circular Economy Act at 3 main areas. One is the demand side. We need to increase demand for recycled materials, for secondary materials. That was actually what was specifically mentioned in the political guidelines of our President. We need to improve the workings of the internal market for circularity, and we need to improve the supply. And here it's also about quality very much as much as quantity. And across all of that, simplification, of course, is an important objective. And I think that we're walking a bit of a precipice when we are preparing the Circular Economy Act between complexity and simplicity. we talk a lot about simplification, but we've heard a lot today also about the really different attributes and issues around different waste streams, different material streams, different value chains, and trying to have adapted approaches to that which are nuanced, which don't have unintended consequences, whilst not getting into too much detail without sort of complicating things too much, is difficult. We need to be tailored, but we need to not be meddling too much, not too much of a visible hand of we bureaucrats. So that's why it's a messy sausage machine, as the Commissioner mentioned. So what we need, I mean, what we're doing now, of course, is collecting evidence. We need to have evidence-based policy making. We have our open public consultation, which is also a call for evidence. I looked this morning, we have 128 submissions already. The deadline is the 6th of November, so if you haven't already started preparing, then we are really interested to particularly hear figures, analysis, data, not just, you know, we think this or our position is that. I mean, it's really useful for us to have the kind of evidence that we need to actually develop our proposals. So what are we looking at? I mean, a lot of things have been mentioned already. I mean, level playing field is key, and it's something which I think doesn't require a great deal of complication. Maybe I'll be proven wrong. But if you look at things like end of waste criteria, it's clear that the situation now where we have many types of secondary materials and waste which get stopped at borders, not just national borders, but within member states, is causing a lot of extra administrative burdens and costs and friction within the internal market. We need to tackle that in order that we can really free up the trade of secondary materials as a commodity across the European market. And we're actually, I mean, we talk about exports and imports of secondary materials, and I was looking at the figures. I think it's 47 million. You can probably tell me better than I would know, but I think it was Eurostat who said 47 million tons per year of imports of secondary materials, 36 million exports, but more than twice, about 84 million tons, I think, of intra-EU trade in those materials, of recyclable materials. So, I mean, it is very important that we get that internal market to work properly. We need to work on demand, on boosting demand for the reasons that the Commissioner outlined in terms of plastic, you know, this killer bottleneck. And who's going to invest in recycling capacity if we're not clear that we can sell the final product? Same goes for textiles. There's particular waste streams where, you know, we have plenty of European financing, including from the EIB. We have eco-design criteria coming in, which should make the recycling more easier, shall we say, getting rid of some of the more difficult design traits. I don't know, blends of fibres and dyes and chemicals in textiles, for example. We have the EPR schemes. You have lots of framing legislation, but if you can't sell the secondary material at the end of it, then nobody's going to invest in it. So we really need to try to use either public procurement, and they're actually we are working on the assumption in the reform of public procurement directive next year that we will have the possibility of sort of EU preference in there. Just to come back to what you were saying, Lyonel. And on recycled content, which we have already, as you know, in the packaging waste regulation, we brought that in. And also it's on the table for the end-of-life vehicles regulation. I won't go too much into investment because I think we have more expertise around the table than I can provide. We do have a 27 billion euro per year investment gap. We've been working with the EIB on actually trying to identify where that gap is more accurately. We are, of course, looking at the possibilities of the new instruments such as the competitiveness coordination tool, but we already have 8.6 billion euros of cohesion funding earmarked for circularity and recycling from 2021 to 2027. So we need to use that. I'll just make 3 points because I'm not sure how I'm doing for time, but 3 points that maybe we want to go into in a bit more detail. One is this question of time. as the Commissioner said, we are planning to not have to wait until the Commission proposal for the Circular Economy Act plus co-legislation procedure plus implementation, entry into force and so on. We hear the cries of the need for urgency, and we are intending to come forward with some more quick fixes to deal with some of those problems that recyclers are facing in terms of low prices and imports and so on. So that's the first thing. Second is just to remind that, I mean, we're talking a lot about materials and recycling, and I think that we always need to remind ourselves about the other R's higher up the scale. And there's one question to the Commissioner, I think, about related to permitting, and I was thinking, well, yeah, we also need to think about the materials that are still in our economy and haven't become waste yet, including critical raw materials. You know, I think, yes, it was to do with the time it takes to permit. If, you know, if we suddenly face problems in terms of rare earths being imported, if we can use the machinery, the devices that contain those materials for longer, then we reduce our dependency in that way as well, also stockpiling. So I think we need to think about the wider value retention activities, and I think there are many job opportunities in Europe for those activities because they tend to be delivered in proximity to the consumption of the products. And then finally, really, just to say that the big wheels keep on turning in the DG Environment, in the Commission. We don't have a Circular Economy Action Plan 3.0. We don't have a sort of big strategy document. Everybody's very focused on the Circular Economy Act or on the sort of more immediate initiatives that we may come in with. But we're still working on implementation and compliance. We have a whole raft of implementing and delegated acts as a result of the European Green Deal, a lot of them with big impact. I mean, things like eco-design. We're still working on investment. We're still working on all the international aspects. So we are still firing on many cylinders, even if everybody's talking very much about the Circular Economy Act. So maybe I'll leave it there.
William, thanks also for expanding with additional reflections on the previous and, say, upcoming policy initiatives, bringing in instruments, also the discussion on instruments like public procurement, and connecting again back the discussion around recycling with the product side of the circular economy transition to the eco-design, the ESPR, and its importance for also, say, supporting recycling practices, uptake of secondary materials, and starts broadly talking about the importance of strengthening the demand side, making the internal market more functional, and also going back to the supply side of the entire value chain. So yeah, quite a number of points, of course, to see how many of them we can manage to address in the follow-up. But now, last but not the least, we have with us today Morgane Veillet Lavallée, Senior Research Consultant from Circular Economy. So Morgane, we heard from the EU, also from industry representative, and is there anything we are missing in this picture? Additional measures or some gaps or something that we need to be mindful of when we talk about? Because from what we heard already today from our speakers, there is still a long way ahead to introduce these enablers, to address different challenges and to implement them effectively. So if you have any additional thoughts, happy to hear.
Thank you so much. And yes, definitely. We've heard a lot of very interesting points today already made, and I hope to be able to contribute to this conversation. I'll be talking to you about two main things today. So the first one is really the progress of European member states in incorporating secondary materials inside their economies, so technical cycling rates and how they're progressing. Maybe to contribute to the discussion, to look at recycling, not just recycling, but also more holistically, what are the other circular economy measures that we should be taking and that need to operate in tandem. And then I'll also talk to you a little bit about textiles. We do a lot of work at Circular Economy on circular textiles, and there'll be some insights to share with you on closing the loop and fiber-to-fiber textile recycling. So just starting very quickly, so I come from Circular Economy. We're an impact organization based in Amsterdam, and our mission is to scale circular economy solutions. We work across a number of sectors. We work across industries, manifold industries, so plastics, e-waste, as well as textiles. And I sit inside our jobs team, so I also work a lot on the social aspects of the circular economy transition. I just wanted to start off with kind of showing you our circularity indicator framework. So maybe some of you have already read our circularity gap report. We essentially measure the state of the circular economy globally, but we also provide this service for governments and European member states. And what I wanted to highlight here was that we look at secondary material inputs. That's one of the indicators that we look at to measure circularity in an economy, but it's not the only one. And the key focus point here is that we look at all material flows inside the economy, whether it be linear inputs, circular inputs, but also stock buildup, so the accumulation of materials that are locked into the economy and that are not being cycled back, such as construction, infrastructure, roads. And you know, the message which I'll be underlining here again is we don't just look at secondary material inputs in isolation. So we're also very interested to look at, well, within the economy, how much are non-renewable inputs also growing? How much is fossil fuels still increasing inside the fueling of the economy? How much is stock buildup also growing? All these points are essential when considering progress of circularity inside a country's economy. And so we also have what we call the technical cycling rate, so the incorporation of secondary materials over all materials used inside the economy. We're slightly less optimistic than Eurostat and the European Commission. We looked in 2022, and the average is 5.5% technical cycling rates across European member states. As you can see, there's some variety. So there are maybe some more front-running countries, such as Poland, and then countries that are stagnating at a lower 2 to 3% technical cycling rate incorporation. And interestingly, we worked with Norway twice. So first in 2018, where we measured that technical cycling rate was 2%, and then again in 2022. And actually, the technical cycling rate really stagnated, which was surprising to them because they had invested a lot in recycling infrastructure. And so they wondered, okay, well, what are we doing wrong, and why are we not progressing like we wish to? And I think essentially here the message is, if we're looking at their other indicators, such as non-renewable inputs inside the economy, if these keep growing, so if virgin material extraction keeps growing, no matter how much you're slightly increasing your recycling, ultimately rising virgin material extraction will always offset the progress that you're making on secondary material incorporation. So yeah, basically overall, just to leave with a message on the stagnation of technical cycling rates, we see three main reasons as to why we're not progressing at the rate that we should be. So the first one, as I said, is just demand for virgin materials is outgrowing recycling gains. Recycling is not scaling fast enough to keep up with the demand for materials, and that is across European economies, but also globally the case. Secondly, the stock buildup. So we know that the construction sector is a huge consumer of resources. What happens is that the more that you build, the more that these materials stay locked into your cities, your environment, and there's no cycling of those materials. So they're essentially locked in. So that's a major sink that we see. And then, thirdly, and perhaps fourthly, there are technical and economic constraints across different value chains that basically are slowing down the recycling potential. And so we mentioned this, for plastics, we can talk about it for e-waste. There are some commonalities across these sectors. The value of the material will degrade with each cycling process. The prices of feedstock for these secondary materials are still too high, and it's not attractive. And then when you look at the material waste streams, particularly those coming from municipal waste, they're also usually just difficult to process and to clean. So there's also some significant technical and economic constraints, which I think we're all familiar with, and that unfortunately affect all value chains in our economies. And finally, maybe this is more pointing towards the Commission that's doing an amazing job really in introducing key policies to enable a circular economy, but we still have significant political and economic barriers which are more systemic. We still have policies that sustain linear practices. We don't have enough discouragement, essentially, of virgin material extraction in the economy, and also insufficient support in collection, sorting, and recycling. I would like to briefly talk about the textile sector and closing the loop in the textile sector. Is there a business case right now for closed loop fiber-to-fiber recycling? So we've done some really exciting research in the recent years. So with the Joint Research Centre, we did a study on the fate and composition of textile waste. And our research was also funded by the Louders Foundation, where we also explored waste composition analysis of non-rewearable post-consumer textiles. And we also looked at what types of business models exist for sorters to commercialize low-value textiles. So really exciting research, working with sorters, with brands, with manufacturers, and with innovation agencies. We looked at 39 tons of low-value post-consumer textiles, so non-rewearable, very important, non-rewearable. And we looked at 10 focus countries, so they're the countries that you see listed here. A lot of them in Western Europe, but we also incorporated 2 countries in Eastern Europe, which actually had a lot less data and a lot less research on essentially the non-rewearable fractions of post-consumer textile waste. So a few of our learnings with this research. The first one is really important. It's essentially showing that 65% of these textiles are actually cotton, like unique cotton. So I actually have here a graph to show you. So 40% of the composition that we found was pure cotton, and then you had some blends within the cotton, and then you had polyester with 12% of the total material mix. So what does this show us? Well, this shows us that there is potential for recycling mechanically and chemically these textiles, cotton, wool for mechanical recycling, and then all types of polyesters, acrylics through chemical. So that was the first good news, that there is potential and there are alleyways for recycling these non-rewearable textile fractions. In addition, we also, so yeah, that's the point. So 74% of this post-consumer non-rewearable textiles could be recycled. That still leaves 26% that don't have a circular destination. And that's mainly due to their composition. So multiple layers, color, and non-removal disruptors. The non-removal disruptors are really important. And I'll get to that in a moment.
Just to interrupt you, now you're talking about the variable one. Or just because you mentioned it, these are non-variable, right?
Yeah, non-rewearable, yeah.
Yeah.
Non-rewearable textiles, so not suited for reuse.
Okay.
Just, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Just for clarification that you're all saying.
Yeah, so non-rewearable textiles, so not for reuse, so that we leave reuse for many other uses of circularity. And what we're seeing is that, so currently only 2% of those non-rewearable textiles are currently being closed-loop recycled. The majority are being downcycled or used as wipers. And we're also seeing that the feedstock prices for wipers are far more attractive than the feedstock prices for fiber-to-fiber recycled feedstock. And so we know there's a potential, there's certainly potential for this recycling to happen, but it's not happening yet because there are significant gaps in the infrastructure that's needed for the sorting, as well as the recycling technologies themselves, the chemical recycling technologies. And we looked at the return on investment, and it was a minimum of 8 years, which is a really long time for a private investor. So there's also kind of a, not a lot of interest from private investors to invest right now in these processes. Nevertheless, the business case could be there, and we've also seen that for sorters, this could be an income generation opportunity. That could be over 10 cents more per kilo for essentially selling this feedstock to a recycler. So our recommendations, and then I will stop there. So our first recommendation is, and it's great to know that EIB is also here and listening in, we need major public-private investments into the sector if we want to really operationalize fiber-to-fiber textile recycling. We need this to essentially improve automated sorting. We need to remove disruptors for chemical recycling. Secondly, our other recommendation is that EPR fees need to contribute towards collection and sorting. And this is currently not happening, even in EPRs in EU member states that have been around for a very long time. You may have heard it, sorters across Europe for textiles are really struggling, and a lot of them are even considering leaving the EU overall. So we need this support to happen, and it has to come through EPR fees. Thirdly, and we think that there's a lot more research that needs to happen on the fiber composition, like more trials and understanding, like, okay, what type of material composition are we getting from this feedstock? We need more connections between waste sorters and recyclers to see also where the opportunity lies. And also, we really welcome all of the initiatives from the European Commission. We think, mandatory separate collection, mandatory EPR, these are all really great things that are going to help us get to where we need to be. And end of waste criteria for textiles specifically, great point forward for textile recycling. It's going to create legal certainty, standardized quality, and that will also help to bring private investment. And final message, of course, we've talked a lot about recycling today, and at Circular Economy, we always say, waste hierarchy, don't forget about it. Recycling textiles isn't the end game, and that's also not what we're excited about. We're excited about reducing volumes. We're excited about essentially addressing the major problems that we already have on the market, which is just markets that are overflowing with products which are low-value textiles. So we need to continue addressing this principally as our main barrier. And exploring closed-loop recycling methods, but the technology is not there yet, so there's a lot more we can do in the meantime. If you want to read our reports, find out more about our research, these are our 2 reports, and I'm obviously around if you want more information. Thanks so much. Let's accelerate circularity.
Thank you so much, Morgane, for shedding also more light on the challenges that we face when we are on our way towards a more circular economy, the technical, economic barriers, the rising demand for primary materials, also policy enablers and barriers. Nico resonating quite well also what was mentioned beforehand, but also zooming in more on the case of textiles in particular, because it's kind of a new material, new waste stream that is being now tackled at the EU level compared to some of them before, and it's interesting to see how it kind of fits into the entire picture when you talk about recycling and circularity. And again, quite a number of interesting points and references, so happy to see that we come back to as many of them as possible. But thank you, and thank you for these initial interventions from our panelists. Now, before I come back to our participants, we have 2 quick interventions from our respondents for today. So I would start with Eva Bille, Head of Circular Economy, European Environmental Bureau, if you would have any additional reactions to what we heard today from the panelists and also from the Commissioner.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. There's a lot to respond to in just 3 minutes, but I will do my best. First of all, I'd like to echo the fact that recycling on its own will not reduce waste levels and is insufficient to reduce Europe's material and carbon footprints at the speed and scale that's needed to achieve our climate and environmental goals, but certainly also our security, resilience, and competitiveness goals. I hope you all had the opportunity to read the EEA's recent State of the Environment report, as well as the excellent 2024 Bend the Trend report by UNEP. The list of scientific evidence is long and backed by very many resources, so I don't need to go into detail on that. But we produce more waste than our systems can cope with, and I just want to echo the excellent explanation just now about how we should stick to the waste hierarchy and make sure that we prevent extended lifespans, reuse and repair before we consider recycling. A concrete example of that is the packaging waste recycling in the EU that essentially stagnated since 2010, despite many industry initiatives and policies focused on recycling. So improvements in recycling have indeed struggled to keep up with growing levels of waste. And I'd like to compare it to what we're trying to do now is we have a little mop, and we're trying to mop the floor from all the water that's spilling, and we're trying to bring the mop to integrate that water into the economy. But we're doing way too little too slow the flow of the tap that is going into the economy. So I think your point was excellently made, Morgane, on we have to reduce the resources that go into the economy before recycling will have a tangible effect on the economy. To quote the EEA again, sorry to bring EEA into this, but they said European circular economy policies have been reinforced over recent years. As also mentioned, indeed, a lot has happened, as you said, but they still need to become more binding and target-oriented to overcome the uptake of a more regenerative economy in Europe. This means moving beyond the current strong focus on waste to address resource use more directly. Circular policy should become more binding and target-oriented, extending beyond waste to possibly include targets on resource use or material footprint. That's the EEA saying that, not me, but I do agree. And this leads me to a point made also by the commissioner in her speech, linking circular economy to the bioeconomy, which I think is very important, especially considering that 7 out of 9 planetary boundaries have already been crossed and that we just reached a climate tipping point today, I read. Excellent. So we need to define a bioeconomy that per definition exists within planetary boundaries and does not exacerbate or exceed this problem. We need to look into also, as was mentioned by the commissioner and by several of you, hazardous substances. Hazardous substances and waste, yes, they do hinder recycling and make it more expensive, but they are also a problem in themselves. So we need to address the hazardous waste at the source rather than including them in products in the first place. And we need to focus on recycling quality, because only when we have quality recycling, quality sorting, quality collection, can that go re-enter the economy in the right order of the waste hierarchy. I'd like to end on a note on simplification. Of course, that had to come up today, and I enjoyed the analogy on sausage making. If laws are like sausages, then why are we with the simplification drive now taking a very quick look at certain parts of the sausage value chain and plotting them together to make a Frankenstein sausage, and at the same time banning the use of the word sausage for vegetarian or plant-based options? The need to consult properly before we simplify, the need to have an impact assessment, an environmental impact assessment, but a social impact assessment, an impact assessment that asks industries, not only the ones that were loud and that came and were proactive, but all of the industries that are potentially impacted by the simplification, deregulation drive. We need to have a proper assessment before we go back and change laws that were adopted with an ordinary legislative process that had consultation. And well, right now what we are struggling to follow what's going on, and that means that it's simply happening too quickly for anyone to be able to really react with data or figures. So, final point on simplification, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And then over to Maria Vera Duran, Senior Technical Manager from Recycling Europe, for your reactions.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to have some comments and open questions, I will say, about the discussion. I think one of the common points from the commissioner and also the panelists is this idea that there's no one size fits solution for all the waste streams. And we have here for example, when there is a well-functioning market for metals, for steel, aluminum, for paper and cardboard, in here is key to have access to international markets, because there's not enough demand at EU level to absorb all the recycling materials that are produced in Europe. And on the other side, we have a market failure for the case of plastics and textiles. Even if we try to see the business case, the reality is that there is a lot of competition with virgin materials, also with imports coming from third countries that are making the business very, very difficult.
We see as we speak that the recycling facilities for plastics and textiles are closing, are shutting down, and this is a huge crisis. And I wonder if the circular economy will be the solution, or if we need some intermediate actions to fix this problem of lack of demand and unfair competition from third countries. Also, the commissioner was mentioning the data from Plastics Europe. And it was last week that Plastics Europe published new data, and they say that right now the EU leadership on circular plastic is eclipsed by China's overcapacity. China alone almost doubled the production in the EU in terms of circular plastic. So what are we going to do to achieve the leadership in the EU in terms of circularity, as it was promised in the Clean Industrial Deal? This is something that I think we should target as soon as possible, because if not, we will not have a recycling industry to meet the targets in 2030 or 2040. Another question that I think, another point I have is on the end of waste criteria, that I think it has been shared also this point across different sectors. And I think one of the key objectives of the circular economy is to remove trade barriers across member states. And here I also wonder how we can accelerate this procedure, because it was in 2022 when the Joint Research Center published this report with the 5 key waste streams to develop end of waste criteria. It was for plastics, textiles, construction and demolition, the mineral fraction, rubber for tires, and paper and cardboard. And we are finalizing this year, 2025. We are entering 2026, and still we haven't seen any end of waste criteria, almost 4 years later. So it's clearly this current procedure doesn't work. How we can make this happen, how we can fix all this problem and have EU-wide end of waste criteria. We know that bilateral agreements in between member states can facilitate, but we really want harmonized rules to create a truly market for recycling materials. So these are my two comments. I'm happy to also listen from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maria. And now, back to our participants for any questions you may have. I believe we have one more question from Patrick.
Yeah, I have actually one advice for the Commission and one question where I disagree completely. For the Commission, I think the work you will be doing on the internal market is quite important. It's not new, this discussion. And the discussion of when is waste, not waste, for me, it's a semantic discussion, to be honest. It's the access to the material for being recycled, which is important. And there, I remember in 2010, with the Raw Materials Initiative, we proposed to use the concept of pre-consented facility within the waste shipment regulation to make it easier for companies with high recycling capacity to access hazardous waste. So think about that concept. And your remark of the inner circles, it's completely right. Pay attention that you don't hit the fence twice, because we have a couple of companies working on remanufacturing, trying to import machinery, equipment from throughout Europe to scale up. They don't even know what to apply. Is it waste? Is it non-waste? So don't hit the fence twice. Where I completely disagree, it's with the statement that there is no capacity for recycling, for metals. I'm quite sure that there is a capacity. We've just made a study where we see that annually Europe is exporting 1.2 million tons of copper, 1.2 million tons of aluminium scrap, which can be absorbed by the European industry. I have a list of 7 to 8 investments in recycling capacity. In Belgium, we will have a new plant online, hopefully in 2 years when we get the permit, for aluminium recycling. But what we see, and there Europe should not be naive. What we see is that third countries like China, Malaysia, Indonesia are using trade barriers to export their metal scrap and using subsidies they get from their government linked to reduction of carbon emissions, because recycling, yes, it applies to the reduction of CO2, in order to pay the scrap more expensive than our European companies can allow to. Because metals are priced on the London Metal Exchange, and whether it's recycled or not, it's the same price level. So we are pleading really to fix this problem, and at least linked to the WTO, where I think the Commission is right not to go beyond the World Trade Organization rules, at least have reciprocity in this field. And on the battery value chain, yes, we should work on a battery value chain recycling. That's pretty clear for me. We are in a bad shape. And even on steel. Because why is the scrap exported? Because it's not competitive anymore to open a long product steel mill. And there, if we try to find innovative ways to separate the scrap, to push it to a high quality recycling, and create that demand, because recycling, final recycling, is capital intensive. An aluminium plant, copper plant, 100 million euros investment. You only do that if you have access to 100,000 tons of copper, because that's the scale of you need to be more or less competitive. So this is a clear appeal. Yes, there's recycling capacity, and yes, the industry is prepared to invest, but access to the raw materials, as is the permitting issue, and access to de-risking the business case is key. But access to raw materials, if that's not there, our companies even don't think about a business case.
Thank you. I will take one or two more questions. Yes.
Thank you, and good afternoon. My name is Aline Maigret, and I work for Zero Waste Europe. Firstly, I want to show that I'm very impressed on how all participants really managed to keep the sausage analogy alive until the end of the meeting. And secondly, more feedback or comments also. So I think we all agree here in the room that European production cannot really compete at the global level if we're really only looking at the cost of products, especially here focusing on recycled content. And we believe, at least at Zero Waste Europe, that there is a potential strategic advantage also when looking at the quality and transparency of the production. And we wonder how that can be also reflected within the Circular Economy Act. William, I'm very happy that you mentioned the term quality when in your intervention. So we see it's the Commission is slowly starting to warm into the idea of also introducing the quality aspect. And when I say quality, it's also, I also mean like the broader quality aspects, also meaning toxic-free circular economy. So how do we ensure we don't recirculate toxics within our economy? So a question would also be like, what are the concrete initiatives that we also looking at now? How do we link that with other files? Also, looking more specifically at the Circular Economy Act. Thanks.
You, and maybe one more question from the lady in the third row to your right.
Hello everyone, I'm Diane Thomas from Paprec. So Paprec is a waste management company and also the first recycler in France. So thank you for all the contributions that I think are very, let's say, comprehensive and also reflect on the challenges that we are facing, especially as recyclers today. Of course, we want to observe the waste hierarchy. So this goes without saying, but I wanted to make this point. As we mentioned, we're facing big challenges, especially on the inflows of virgin materials and allegedly called recycled content from the rest of the world. So this requires indeed controls, effective controls, custom codes, alignments, tweaked, let's say, on the PET, virgin PET custom codes versus the recycled PET custom codes, so to also track these streams that come from the rest of the world, because at the moment we cannot really differentiate them since there is no material control nor differentiation of custom codes. So maybe on this, as we mentioned, also calculation of the recycled content methodology. I think this is also a very important point, and I know that I heard that the Commission is also working on it. So here also a call for considering, you mentioned an exemption for EU preference that you would consider for public procurement, William Neale. I think this would also deal for the calculation methodology under the SUPD. So this is something that was discussed in the past. I think this is welcome as a fast, easy way out, let's say, that would really help our industry. And the circularity in Europe, the actual European recycling and also circular economy, because what we are relying on is now an imported circular economy that is a bit regrettable when we consider that we are driving as Europe the word recycling and circular economy. So this is just more a comment than a question. And maybe, as we mentioned, two other items on the EPR schemes. So indeed, it has proved efficient, but it has also proved sometimes not sufficiently efficient. And on this, when we talk about harmonization, I think it's very important to also know what we put behind this word of harmonization. And we are very happy to contribute to the discussion that you are already, let's say, making alive and very interactive on the Circular Economy Act, and also maybe Omnibus, Environmental Omnibus. If I may just conclude, as our Commissioner Roswall mentioned in her keynote speech, the GHG decrease capacity for circularity that is expected, I mean, that can amount to 20% of greenhouse gas emissions reduction. I think this is also something that needs to be deeply considered by the European Commission, since at the moment we speak a lot about the emission trading system, which only deals about scope 1 emissions, and we are not considering scope 2 and the rest of the emissions that you could also build a lot of GHG savings, let's say, when you consider recycling. So this is also something like, you know, in terms of reflection that you may conduct internally at the European Commission that would be happy to see happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I will now come back to the panel, and we will then have another round of questions. So maybe, William, I believe we can start with you with a couple of questions that were directly for you, but then I think some of them would be relevant also for other speakers. So, yeah, back to you.
I'll try and provide some answers, and also I take on board some of the very useful comments as well. From people who have more experience from me and different perspectives, which is why it's useful to have these discussions. Just first on indicators, because I mean we've talked a lot about circular material use rate and recycling rates, and just to say that our own circular economy monitoring framework includes a whole panoply of indicators. Circular material use rate has become the buzz one now because it's our KPI, and it's in the Clean Industrial Deal that we're going to double it from the current 11.8. But as we found out, actually, if the denominator changes, then the percentage doesn't mean a lot necessarily. From the example of Norway that we just heard, so we need to look at the overall material use, and there was talk about the use of material consumption targets. Now, we do measure it. We have indicators for it in our circular economy framework, along with the others. When it comes to targets for that, I mean, there are sort of methodological and political reasons for being a bit wary of that. Even if personally, you might be interested in, and understand the usefulness of them. We have very different realities in different member states when it comes to the attributions of natural resources and the ways that they use, the ways that the economies work. I mean, if you look at the difference between Malta and Finland, or very different realities. The second thing is that the methodology is quite difficult to get right, partly because of that. But also, we found that we've had targets in certain areas like waste recycling for many years. We are getting there. But I think what Enrico Letta and Mario Draghi were saying is that it's actually getting the economics right to get in the right direction. So it's the doing rather than having a target. I do agree that targets give a sense of direction and they can be useful. I think in this case, it's a very questionable one. And I think politically, even if we in this room know that reducing our material consumption doesn't necessarily mean reducing our well-being or our economic activity, that whole sort of sufficiency debate is maybe not the right one to be having at the moment politically, because it will be jumped on by many people who have less understanding than we do. I think that just looking at the discussion of the other loops as well, I think it's important. I think it's circular economy that's talked about slowing the loop and thinning the loop, as well as it's not just about the sort of 8 million or 8 billion tons of materials going into the economy every year in Europe, and the sort of 11 or 12% that then is looped around. It's thinning the loop, so that is about the material consumption, and it's slowing it. So we're really optimizing the use of products and assets in our economies, whether it's better use of building space or whatever it could be. We need to focus on that. On simplification, I won't dwell too long. We'll see what comes out of that. But we are doing a serious job on it. We are looking at what is basically part of the sausage analogy is that we have very many sausages that are built over time. I don't know if that really works. But it's an iterative process. So we have legislation going through the process, being negotiated. So we have all kinds of different reporting requirements and different timings and so on. And that iterative process does result in some anomalies, some things which are rather, well, maybe not so logical. On end of waste, I was involved, I had the horrible experience a few years ago of trying to negotiate it for paper and realising, the reason it takes such a long time, that there are, it sounds great, you have a clear definition of what is a secondary material based on whatever, the purity requirements should be for the future uses, but those uses differ. And then you get different people in the chain who have different interests in there, and then you get a lot of lobbying, and it takes time, and it's not as simple as it sounds, but it is very important that we do it. I think we have to have a real go at seeing how we can streamline that process. But I don't think it's semantics. I don't think it's only semantics. One of the crucial things which we've heard quite a few people talk about today is the trade aspects and capacity, and I'm hearing different messages because we hear complaints that prices will collapse if we ban exports or if we put tariffs on them, whatever, because we don't have the capacity. What are we going to do with it if it stays in Europe? But then we hear also that there is the capacity there, and we hear also that there's a lot of capacity which isn't being used at the moment. So I think what we need is a better understanding, and we will get that through the call for evidence and in the open public consultation. But we have also asked recently all of the recycling associations to try and provide us with better figures, because we have Eurostat provides the levels of recycling of different materials and so on, but to know what the reality is in terms of capacity, where it is, how much of it is actually used. We've asked the recycling associations, we've also asked the member states to provide us with better information, because we've realised that we don't have enough to really understand the stocks and flows and where that capacity is or isn't.
Thanks for this concise package of responses to a number of questions that were directed to you, but I think some of them also would be relevant. For example, for Lyonel, this question around recycling capacity. Now, we heard that another line of argument around is that there is a recycling capacity, and if we talk about, for example, exports of scrap metal and the discussions around restrictions around it. So, what is your take on this? Is it about that the restrictions of scrap metal just generally are an issue or a problem because how will we absorb this material, or is it Is it that we need to develop our recycling capacities first before we introduce this kind of measures, or just generally any additional thoughts on this particular issue, recycling capacities and policies?
First, I think that yes, we need more and more recycling capacities in Europe, clearly, and we have to be a bit more precise when we talk about recycling capacity. We, as recycler, we tend to say we are recycler, but when it comes to metals, we are not foundries, we are not steel industries. Okay, so we need to be into a bit more details, but globally speaking, we need to have more recycling capacities in Europe. Okay. The obvious statement is that today there is an excess of available feedstock compared to the existing capacity. So in the future, we hope that we can close the gap. So that's the very basic statement. I mean, no question about that. I mean, it's purely factual. Then what's important, I would just like to mention two points. The first one is that in the same way that I don't think that we should have some ban of imports of some materials from out of Europe. We should not have a full ban for the export. What we need is competitiveness. So we need to make sure that at the end of the day, we'll always have a way to be exposed to the competition out of Europe. If we make a closed European market between ourselves, it will last for 5 or 10 years with a lot of subsidies. Then it would disappear if it's not competitive. So we need to make sure that we always have an exposure on both ways, inflows, outflows with the external market. Then there is a second point which is very important to me, which is why it's a bit more philosophical, but why should we not impose huge restrictions on the exports? Is that it all depends on having a sovereignty about the access of these materials. I mean, when it comes to cobalt, 80% of the cobalt is from RDC, and RDC is a Chinese investment. That's a matter of fact. So what do? Either we reuse the cobalt that we got in our countries, or we keep on importing the cobalt from China, which is exploited with different conditions and so on. So the question about sovereignty in long term is very important. We've got short-term arbitrage. The point to me as a recycler is to say that we are frightened about the drop in prices of the materials. That's not the point. This is about sovereignty and having converging interest in a long-term view.
But we also talk about subsidies. There was, a reference to the subsidies, heavy subsidies coming from China that is also coupled with, for example, their restrictions of their raw materials. So there is an interplay of instruments and policies. And in a, let's say, more geopolitical, geoeconomic world we are witnessing now, is there a case to create competitiveness, for example, and strong market without subsidies that would couple it, given what is happening with our global competitors or any?
Yeah, that's a very, very, very interesting question, and we could spend 2 or 3 hours around that. But yes, first, I think that ecosystem and partnerships among the industrial is really key amongst EU players, but not only. Having, let's talk about Chinese investment. Okay, this is not shameful at all. Today, Chinese players. They want to invest into Europe. They do that for the automotive industry. I mean, we must welcome their investment, and we must welcome also their ability to set up competitiveness in Europe. Okay. The point is, do we accept an overflow into our market, or do we organize that and try to make converging partnership? I think this is the key point. I mean, partnering is really key. Partnering is foremost amongst EU players, but not only. So yes, we can be competitive without subsidies, and we have to be competitive without subsidies, because subsidies are not sustainable.
Thanks for that. But then also for again referencing the importance of investments, and then back to you, Emmanuel. I think a number of our speakers and participants mentioned the investments today, and also the role of the EIB, if I may gossip a bit. So building on what you were talking about, the investments in recycling, I mean, be it in supporting municipalities, but also enabling the investments in the recycling infrastructure, building on what we heard already now by our participants and speakers. Is there anything you would like to add, let's say, when you talk about priorities for the EIB in the coming periods when it comes to the recycling sector? Yeah. Happy to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you. I think in terms of priority, we already have our 8 strategic priorities, and I guess the recycling goes probably into the, into competitiveness, into the innovation, into also the climate bank roadmap, because, the climate bank, because recycling will have a carbon or decarbonization impact, which is substantial. We're not driving the market, we're responding to the market. So, and from what I've been hearing in the room so far, I have the impression, and I'll be very glad that people tell me if this is not the perception, that it seems to be that it's more the market that needs to be fixed first, rather than a lack of available investment. I have the impression that because the market case or the business case are not there, then the investment willingness is not yet ripe, and it's still difficult to finance. We've been looking at different industries, and for example, I go back on the plastic, and we financed one company, but we had several companies. And all the operation we've been looking at during the discussion, all of them gradually they've been postponed, and not because of our cost of financing, because for external reason that they had to postpone for different reasons, which I don't want to go there, but definitely not the financing. So, my take, and I would really be very happy to hear something different from the floor, is that I don't think financing availability is the main blocking factor. But if this is so, then I would be happy to hear it, to see also what kind of we can. We're not overwhelmed with with business where we cannot finance them. It's just, I think we struggle to find deals that we can finance, because the business case is still, is sound or not. So,
but may I just add on this? A reference was also made to the risking. So it's not just about access to financing, because arguably there is plenty of money out there that could potentially also be channelized towards recycling, not necessarily related to the EIB, but private financial markets and different kinds of public financing schemes. But just is it, to what extent do you see this link just to the risk and to the importance of reducing that risk, so that recycling companies and waste operators could then access also funds coming from financial markets, but they currently cannot, because the sector is considered to be risky, also because of all what we discussed now about the competition with primary materials. But then we have the political, priorities and the importance of this sector, as we discussed, for competitiveness. So I'm just saying, is there a case, say, to be strongly involved when it comes to be involved even more strongly on the, not on just the, but on the de-risking to unlock private investments into the recycling industry? Anything?
Yeah, but I think we're already involved in the de-risking, because through several mechanism guarantees through InvestEU, through our venture debt, also backed up by the InvestEU, we enter into venture debt, lowering our, increasing our risk appetite, because we're covered. And I think this, by going in there and doing the due diligence, we obviously will be opening up to other financiers, because usually our due diligence, it goes more in details. But again, so I think we're already into the de-risking. Maybe we could have more volume from InvestEU, but I'm not sure that we've been able to consume everything at this stage. And it's so, yeah, it's I'm not sure that unless we can, I'm not on the risk side, I'm more on the technological and the sectoral side, but I don't have the impression that the de-risking, we can do more, but probably, I think it's more on the communication or targeting with, because, on the InvestEU, you have a very large range of activities that you can finance. And obviously, again, we respond to the market. So there's also maybe a communication issue, or saying, okay, now we can have some specific window or specific initiatives targeting some specific material streams or industries, and then that could trigger also a demand. So, I mean, that's my take from my experience so far. But happy to hear different views. I mean, that would be interesting from my side. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your reflections on this. And just to clarify, the risking here, I guess we discussed about in terms of accessing finance, not the other risking, which is about global supply chains, which we often use in the Brussels bubble. But here it's just that make it easier to fund our recycling industry and the uptake of secondary materials. But thank you for these reflections. Morgane, we had quite a number of questions and comments. I'm sure some of them caught your attention. So pick your favorite or a couple of favorite points you would like to address.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great. Well, on the trade element, I think this also applies to the textile sector. We all know that the textiles value chain is inherently global, and that most of our textiles are coming from outside the EU. So some questions we get sometimes is, okay, well, why bother, sorting and recycling in the European Union if ultimately all of this is being produced in Southwest Asia or outside of the European Union? And I think here the sovereignty element, which Lyonel, you mentioned, is really important. I think it has to be a business case that we decide as a union to invest in sorting and recycling of textile feedstock to turn it into our business model and our quality standards that we wish to see, and also something that we can conserve and sell as a resource. If we're ultimately dependent, or really leaving all of this material to be processed outside of the EU and just importing it back or buying it back, that really limits our ability to shape the narrative and to shape standards. So yeah, I wanted to react on the trade element, and I think it's key, essentially, that we build this capacity in the European Union. And perhaps also, Emmanuel, to your point on infrastructure and responding to the market, yes, I hear that. Something that I did underline in my presentation, though, is that currently the return on investment for a traditional, so private investor, is really long and not attractive, not appealing. And I think for any R&D, and because this is R&D we're talking about, I mean, ultimately automated sorting, you're using infrared technologies. For chemical recycling, you're coming up with new processes. This is where support needs to come in from the public sector. It cannot be solely driven by the market, because we know the potential, but currently there is just significant investment to trial to see what this could actually look like. So yeah, essentially, I think for the textile sector specifically, we do need public sector support, namely on automated sorting and new closed loop recycling technologies for textiles and other materials.
Thank you for that, Morgane. I think we have time for one more round, but as long as we keep it short and sweet, so please just focus on the question that you have, and we can then try to address them by the end of the event. Yeah, please.
Miss, I will keep it short and sweet. From the Detergents Association again, I have a very specific question with regards to the relation of Circular Economy Act and Bioeconomy Act and such horizontal pieces of legislation with the sectorial legislation. More specifically for our sector, the detergents regulation has been recently revised, and it includes targets for circular and sustainable feedstock. So there is a risk from our side that then we will be double regulated through our sectorial legislation and other pieces of legislation such as Circular Economy Act.
Sorry to interrupt you, I hope that the mic is working well. For example, Emmanuel, do you hear what we're saying? Okay, perfect, just double checking. Okay, please continue.
So we would like to hear how the Commission is looking into the current, let's say, sectorial legislation. Can this be complementary to the horizontal pieces of legislation, such as Circular Economy Act? And is this perspective have been taken into consideration so far? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, we have a question in the front row.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Anna. I'm a policy analyst here at the EPC. And my question, I think this is a topic that the commissioner as well the panel has mentioned many times, that virgin materials are inherently a lot cheaper than secondary ones. And we've talked about how we need to get the economics right. We mentioned EPR a bit, different taxations and things like that. And just based on the expertise on the panel, I would like to know what are exact practical measures that you would recommend that would help get the economics right and make these secondary materials indeed more competitive. Thank you.
Thank you. And perhaps one more question. I'm just trying to see if I'm not really coming totally blind. Hope I'm not missing on anyone. Yeah, okay. There was one old question already when the commissioner was finalizing her speech, which is also about partnerships, better cooperation between industry and waste treatment companies. So strengthening these partnerships, which was also referenced during our panel exchange. So just kind of throwing it out back to the discussion now, if there are any additional remarks. But I'd say I would close the Q&A with these questions, and I would say back to you, William. I think these questions were again for you, but we can then expand later on. So.
It's ironic because I think there's a lot more expertise at the table amongst the speakers. But no, just to try and respond on those. I mean, in terms of horizontal versus sectoral legislation, it's a good question. I mean, the Circular Economy Act will be an omnibus, but we don't call it that for fear of it being confused with other omnibuses. We have a lot of omnibuses at the moment. But it will be in the sense that it would be targeted, opening up other bits of legislation in targeted ways, whether it's done in more through the sectoral legislation, the existing legislation, or more through a centralised act. This is for our lawyers to advise us on, and we'll see which is the best way forward on that. And on, I mean, circular feedstock and the articulation between bioeconomy strategy and circular economy. I mean, for me, the critical thing is a cascading principle, and I think that corresponds very well to the definition of circularity, of keeping things in their highest value use for as long as possible. On the relative costs and prices, which are different, of virgin and secondary materials, very good question. I mean, as it was said by the Commissioner also, the price of virgin materials is quite often not taking into account very often not taking into account the environmental and societal costs and so on. How to internalise those externalities? Of course, eco-modulation of extended producer responsibility is a way to do that. Actually, we forgot a question about harmonisation of extended producer responsibility. I could just actually say that on that, just to do a little segue, I think that we can't foresee full harmonisation in the sense that the waste management costs in Finland are very different from Portugal or Greece. Or, I mean, so in terms of the fees, it's not really foreseeable. I think in terms of maybe approximation or harmonisation of some of the criteria for eco-modulation would be very helpful. But then VAT as well. I mean, I'm not a tax expert, but I've talked to tax experts that tell me that there is a very clear logic for not putting VAT on secondary materials on the basis that they've already been put on the market once before. And that would be quite that would redress things to a certain extent. I'll leave the partnerships question for others to talk about, because I think it's more about private sector partnerships. But I would just say, also in relation to the financing issue, we do need to try to blend financing also across borders. We are working on this idea of trans-regional circularity hubs. If we could bring in EPR fees from different member states as well, if we could bring in maybe landfill charging, incineration charging, progressive charging. I've seen that done in places like Catalonia, for example, where they very successfully put that into investment funds. There are other sources of financing. I think partnership is key to that. I would like to come back on China, but I don't. If you want to give other people a chance to speak, then
we can come back in the end indeed to this. But just one question, indeed, I actually wanted to also ask something more on the EPR itself and now what is envisaged under the Circular Economy Act. You mentioned, of course, that there are different practices across member states and the importance of eco-modulation. But now, I guess people, I mean, involved in this discussion. I mean, we hear different kinds of ideas when it comes to the Circular Economy Act on the EPR, that there will be additional criteria or standards, but then how it relates to the existing directives, which are already being transposed, implemented. Anything that's possible to share on this kind of further harmonization efforts, at least on some EPR schemes, because of course it depends on the waste stream, on the waste legislation, could be at least interesting now in the run-up to the Circular Economy.
Yes, I mean, we're fishing for ideas as well, of course, in our open public consultation. But we talk about expanding the scope, so looking at other areas where we can bring in extended producer responsibility, as it is quite popular, actually. I mean, considering that it's a charge on those putting products on the market, it does work, even if it's very complex. So expanding the scope, simplifying, and digitizing. And I think the last two are maybe related in the sense that if we can't do things through opening up the legislation, there are quite big possibilities, quite big potential for using platforms and AI and so on to simplify matters. We're also looking at the requirements for authorized representatives. There again, there's a lot of pros and cons, and I think we need to ask the regulators in the member states. We need to ask the producer responsibility schemes. We need to ask all the people around the table, because I think there are pros and cons, and we need to be very aware of those before we make any decisions on that.
Well, thanks for that. And also I was tempted to open the topic of digitalization, but it's also a huge topic, and the EPC
we talked about the digital product passport.
Yes, exactly,
before,
digital product passport, exactly. But yeah, EPC was involved in the discussion for many years now, and it's also referenced in the Clean Industrial Deal. So very interesting topic, but definitely a world on its own, connected with circular economy, of course, and other agendas, but definitely very interesting possibility to explore. And to make further advancements on. Thank you. I will come back to you on the China point, but in the final, let's say in the wrap-up, and something that I already start with you, Morgane, if you have any reactions to some of the questions we heard now, but also this would be a chance for, say, key message before we wrap up.
Yes, so very briefly, I wanted to comment on the making secondary materials more competitive, which was a question asked, and just circle back to a point I made in my presentation, which is all about, well, concretely, EPR schemes, PROs need to do a lot more in terms of supporting the collection and sorting of textiles. If you talk to sorters or collectors, they will tell you PROs do nothing for them. And yet they carry this fundamental resource that is then needed to permit the treatment of this post-consumer textile non-wearable waste. So very simply incorporate within your PRO a specific fee, which will help, or a portion of the fee, which will help to support sorters and collectors in the EU. Yeah, and I guess concluding message, I have to bring it back to, I guess, the waste hierarchy and not making it solely about recycling. When we were invited to speak here, I thought immediately, oh, it's rare that we focus a presentation on recycling. We're always talking about reusing, reducing, efficiency policies, etc. But yeah, at least for textiles, that's what I can primarily conclude is we've talked about the fact that fiber-to-fiber recycling technologies are not working, or it's like a tiny, tiny portion of what we're currently doing. The urgency is to address the huge volumes that are entering the market every day, and that should be our priority. We will invest in recycling technologies, and we can build a market for these feedstocks, but that shouldn't stop us from addressing the real urgency, which is, how do we control these production volumes, and also just ensure that the quality, that the low value quality of textiles doesn't continue increasing as has been the case for the last decade. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Morgane. And Lyonel, any last thoughts on your side for this?
Maybe on this very interesting question regarding how to bridge the gap between the virgin and recycled materials. Just a first remark, which is not usually said, but not all the materials, recycled materials, are more expensive than the virgin ones. Just give you the example of PVC for the construction. There are some applications whereby recycled products are cheaper. I just want to mention that. It doesn't solve the situation for PET, for instance, but it's a reality. Then why is the recycled product more expensive? I think that there are basically three key reasons. First one, you said it, Morgane, collection sorting is highly expensive. So I will not repeat what you say, but we need to work on that. EPR is part of the solution, not only, but this is the key topic. The second one is that let's not forget that we are competing as a recycling industry. We are competing against an industry for virgin materials, which is in place for years and years. In plastics, sorry to say that, but small recyclers are competing against the big petrochemicals, having assets amortized since 20 years. So we need to bridge the gap, and that's where sometimes we need some financial help, that's for sure. But again, I don't think that subsidies and financial helps are sustainable, so we need to play on demand. And on that point, I think that, again, the virgin is far less expensive, mostly because today Asian players do have an overcapacity in terms of virgin materials. So we are in a competitive capitalistic market whereby the biggest player doesn't play the rules. So recycle minimum content is key, but let's make it a bit stronger. Let's make it a EU minimum recycling content.
Very much, Lyonel. And Emmanuel, any final messages for today's event or any additional responses to some of the questions we heard?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think everybody has responded thoroughly to the question, and I won't add to this. No, just to say that we look forward on the Circular Economy Act, because I think there will be also a financing side to it. So really to collaborate with the Commission on how to, if there is any way we can improve the financing going to the circular economy. We're doing a bit. I'm sure we can do much more, and we need to increase the guarantees. We need to increase the tools for de-risking. On the EIF, on the fund, having specific mandate on circular economy to help SMEs transition will be also an important element. So we really stand ready and very look forward to this collaboration with the Commission, and hope that we can also chip in and do our part on the circular economy transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, for these final reflections. So I believe, or I hope this holds for everyone, that we had a quite rich discussion today. We tried to cover as many topics as possible related to circular economy more generally, but also recycling in particular, hearing from Commissioner Roswall, also from our panelists, respondents, and participants. I think it seems like it's kind of know what to do, more or less. There are some most things I think we agree on, but there are some things, of course, that we can continue the discussion, but at least we know what the topics are. But it seems that we still need to make this transition happen. And for that, of course, we need a right set of policies, regulatory instruments, financial instruments, and we need to have a very good combo when it comes to these tools that we have at our disposal, but also working together with member states, with regions, with the industry, with civil society, because circular economy in the end concerns all of us, how we produce, how we consume, how we go about materials, and how do we actually link this agenda strongly and turn it into a driver for indeed greater sustainability, competitiveness, and resilience. Just a short advertisement, what's coming up from our kitchen. My colleague Anna Bejanishvili is working on the paper exactly looking at the pricing of secondary materials versus primary materials. So that's something that's very good to stay tuned on. Also, our colleague Emma Sepanen is working on a paper on the role of ports to advance the circular economy transition. So these are some relevant upcoming publications that could be interesting for you. Anyways, I would like to thank again the Commissioner Roswall already and the speakers for your really valuable contributions to the discussion, and to our participants for being very active and for staying with us until the end also of this event. And happy to have you again at our EPC discussions, and wishing you a nice rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.